Today we have part 2 of the story with the headline, George Westinghouse. The subheadline says, 100,000 horsepower man. It says, his worldwide ambition. He is not far from realizing this ambition. Already the British Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company is the greatest of its kind in the United Kingdom, and has become in tour for years the most widely known industrial undertaking in the British Empire. On the continent of Europe, he has 3 manufactories. The commercial territory of one of them extends from St. Petersburg to the Pacific. His foresight planned those companies, and his energy got them working before the countries in which they are placed could seriously oppose the import of American manufacturers by a wall of prohibitive tariffs. Let them have tariffs now if they choose. These European industries of his are European, employing the capital and the labor of the countries where they are planted. The conception and the execution of this plan were Napoleonic. The manner in which his British company was started was characteristic of the man. Anybody else would have begun over there in a comparatively small way, but he began there on a grand, even a gigantic scale, everything about it entirely new. New works were erected at Manchester, large enough to employ thousands of men at the start. There were 6,500 men on the payroll when I saw the place in September last. All the machinery was new, and specially made for this establishment. 4,000 men were required to build the works. Add the thousands who were daily employed inside, in the foundries, the electric works, the engine works, the drafting rooms, the offices, and think what all this means to the earning power of Manchester, the sums distributed weekly in wages and paid out for material and supplies. Is it strange that Europe should welcome a man at whose word industries spring up like this full-fledged? Exceptional self-reliance. Self-reliance is developed in George Westinghouse to an extent unusual even among those types of men we call born leaders. That fact gives the clue to his successes and his methods. He can do himself so many things that other men require trained assistants to bring forth. He lost an important patent suit after a hard fight, but within a few days he invented a device which fulfilled the requirements. Many a time in his career, opponents have thought they had him in a corner, but he always broke through and gained abundant elbow room. In the hard times, he kept things going under the severe stress. No one knew how hard-pressed he really was, but he never showed the white feather. On the contrary, he was laying the plans for all the developments which have come since then. He was literally making the plans for new works and thinking out new undertakings. He succeeded in every one of them. Such a man must have his own way of looking at other men, and at all things. You could hardly expect him to take ordinary views and deal in ordinary ways. I was aboard ship with him once, crossing the Atlantic. He is a good sailor, by the way, and in his youth during the Civil War was a naval engineer. On this voyage, except for the time when he was at bed at night and at meals during the day, he constantly walked the deck. We used to say that he walked the greater part of the distance from Sandy Hook to Queenstown. Sheer vital force, not nervous energy. He has made a chain of world-encircling industries. Presumably he is proud of it, and he has a right to be. No other man has done this thing. It is an achievement imperial in its scope. It may be asked from what special achievement he derives most satisfaction. It's a natural question, and one night he made a remark which may be taken as the answer to it. We were bowling along at high speed in his private car, coupled to the end of a fast express. Suddenly we felt the grip of the brakes, and the swift train pulled up within its own length at a dead stop. Looking ahead from the platform, we could just make out in the murky night a deep ravine. Far down at the bottom of a precipitous descent, flaming torches were moving. No bigger than fireflies as seen from our height. There had been a washout, and the train was switched over to creep across a dizzy bridge. Peering down into the flame-pierced gloom, Mr. Westinghouse said, "If someday they say of me that with the air brake I contributed something to civilization, something to the safety of human life, it will be sufficient." The succession of his enterprises has been logical. First the brake to stop the train, then the signal showing when to stop it. Somewhere about that time, as he was becoming interested in electricity through signal work, he became interested in natural gas. He found the gas under a field adjoining his lawn. Before long, he had a company which controlled the natural gas supply for Allegheny County. To use the gas as a motive power was the next step. He already had a steam engine manufactory, and in it he began to experiment with gas engines. Ideas made realities. While other men were talking about the possibilities of electricity, he was making the possibilities actualities. He built the first great electrical generators, as big as the biggest steam engines of the time. The generators for Niagara, 5,000 horsepower each, 10 of them. He has built larger ones since. But even when he was constructing these early giants, he foresaw that limits must be placed ere long on the dimensions of the mechanism of this new force. While the generators for the New York subway are 42 feet in diameter overall, they had to be built in sections and put on the trains in sections. Electrical machinery has assumed such bulk that a single section of one generator would just pass through a railway tunnel without touching the tunnel roof above the train or the crossing rails beneath. If electrical generators could be made smaller and yet give equal power, they must be driven at much higher speeds. To drive them at the highest possible speeds is a task beyond the capacity of the great reciprocating steam engines. Mr. Westinghouse had experimented for years with rotary engines. He acquired the American rights for the Parsons steam turbine, improved it to meet American conditions, and before others were ready for the commercial benefits of these new conditions, he had been for 4 years driving his air brake works by electricity, coupling the generators to turbines, operating at 2,400 revolutions per minute. 4 years the turbines revolved, without a stop for overhauling and without costing a cent for repairs. They are still running as merrily as ever. On that proof of their possibilities, turbines were installed in various parts of the country, and the engine works are now driven to their capacity in supplying the market. More power with less bulk and less cost. Power, power, power. That is the thought one associates with this man. Force and new endeavor. One would think he has enough on his hands already, but he will go on till the last gun fires. There are no brakes on that vitality, except the man's self-control. No one else can throttle that 100,000 horsepower. Administration of such huge and complex affairs demands on the one hand the application of high scientific training and of the latest scientific discoveries. It demands on the other hand executive capacity of the first rank. This is the world of the engineer, our age, the engineering age, and wherever you go, on this side of the Atlantic or the other, you find that George Westinghouse is recognized as one of the men who make the molds for the age to run in. He thinks so rapidly that it is hardly possible for any of his men to keep pace with him. He is the motive power of all his industries. He will strike an idea in New York, get aboard his private car, work at a plan for a new device, and arriving at Pittsburgh, hand the drawing to one of his head men with the instruction, make that. Anticipating the developments of many industries, he has been able to keep his forces at the front, ready for any emergency. Years ago, he invented his friction buffer and draft gear for railway cars, years before the railways were ready. He continued to perfect this device. By and by, the railway trains became longer and heavier, and the 50-ton steel cars appeared. Trains of such length and weight could not have been handled had he not been ready for them. He is always ready, always watchful, and he's as much a power in the old world as in the new. This article was written by Arthur Warren. This story came from the great state of New York, being reported in the New York Times of March 6, 1904. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, then remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.